Hey folks, Jack Wilkie here. Welcome back to another Church Reset read-through. We're getting towards the end of the book, and so looking forward to these last couple of chapters as we wrap things up. I did miss a week last week. I was hosting the Focus Press table at Lads to Leaders Nashville. I know might have some of you listening here who stopped by, so I appreciate those of you who did. Got to meet a lot of folks and just tell them about Focus Press, and of course, the best part is always meeting people I've seen there before, or people who I interact with on here who watch and listen to this and Think Deeper podcast, and everything we're doing here at Focus Press. So I really appreciate you guys and your support, and just an enjoyable time there. Because of that, I did miss a week last week. I'm a little behind on some messages to a few of you as well, so keep an eye out for those, and just back on track this week, and we're coming back with Think Deeper podcast soon as well, so keep an eye out for that. And of course, as always, you can get all the latest at jackwilkie.com. New article just went up on when to leave a church, question I get a lot. So as always, there's a lot going up over there. Be sure you're on the mailing list. Let's go ahead and just jump right into Church Reset. Living Christ is the title of this chapter. Opens with a Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote. As we embark upon discipleship, we surrender ourselves to Christ in union with his death. We give over our lives to death. Thus it begins. The cross is not the terrible end to an otherwise God-fearing and happy life, but it meets us at the beginning of our communion with Christ. When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. That's a well-known quote there at the end. That last sentence of it is one that you'll often see. But really the whole thing is great about the death and about the ending of the old life and the beginning of a new, better, happier life. And that's the focus of this chapter, is the beautiful commitment we've been called to. Continuing. In the previous chapter, we moved from theory into practice. In order to move away from the producer-consumer split of business-like churches to family-minded churches, the first step is teaching people one by one how to follow Jesus. The other half of the equation is an active modeling of Christ-like living. Someone who is the product of Great Commission discipleship is one who has been taught to observe all that Jesus commanded. They're the kind of person who is living out the loving, sacrificial, kingdom-minded perspective Jesus would have us embody. They then show others how to live that way and point the way, continuing the cycle Jesus gave us. In step 1, we teach someone how to have a walk with God. In step 2, we show them the outward manifestation of that walk, all of which can be summed up in one phrase: sacrificial love. Near the top of the list of all that Jesus has commanded us is the command to love one another as he loved us. As discussed previously, this goes far beyond the command to love our neighbor as ourselves. We are to love our Christian brethren better than ourselves because that's what Jesus did. We are to love in such a way that abandons self and puts others first. We can take this radical, against-our-nature step because we know God has us covered. We no longer have to look out for number one because God is caring for us in our stead, and his love never fails. It is this sacrificial love of others that drives family-based church, and that is so often lacking in business-like church. One of the great differences between modern Christianity and Jesus' Christianity is the lack of sacrifice. But by trying to make it convenient for people, we teach them it's about them. That's a message Jesus never taught. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. The Christian life is about denying ourselves, taking up our crosses, and following Jesus, Luke 9:23. Jesus made it clear that he expects his disciples to trade themselves in for something bigger. Sacrifice is an indispensable part of the Christian life. I'll stop right there. This is a really important point, in that you can have one or you can have the other. You can't have both. You can't have a tight-knit church family filled with love and sacrificial love and all of those things and consumers. And that's so often what you get, is the consumers that come for what the church has kind of advertised to them. They've come for what it does for them. How are you going to get those people closer to somebody else? That's just not how it works. And so sometimes in pursuit of numbers, in pursuit of whatever it may be that leads us to kind of keep it shallow, bring people in that way, and not challenge people, not really reprove, rebuke, exhort, do all the kinds of things that church leadership is supposed to do. That's the cost, is that you're just not going to get the closer church family. And so this is really important that we do lay out the requirement of sacrifice, and not 0 to 100, but bring people along and to show it's going to be a little bit more. It's going to be take a little more of your time. It's going to take a little more of your comfort, or whatever the case may be. Continuing. What does this mean for the Christian in the producer-consumer system, though? It might mean sacrificing sin for doing God's will, or sacrificing events on our schedule to make it to church gatherings. In the New Testament's picture of church life, though, sacrifice goes beyond just our personal walk with Christ. We're expected to sacrifice for each other and for the lost. That's what loving as Jesus loved entails. Jesus gave up heaven and all the blessings he enjoyed there to come to be a bondservant and go to the cross for us. Philippians 2, 5-8. We're commanded to have this same mind just a couple of verses after being commanded to consider one another as more important than ourselves. Paul became all things to all men for the sake of the gospel, 1 Corinthians 9:22, showing us that souls are more important than our personal preferences and comfort. It's not just about cold, ascetic self-denial, depriving ourselves of happiness and fun to trade our way into heaven. Jesus gave us the parables of the hidden treasure and pearl of great price in Matthew 13:44-46 to show us that the kingdom would be worth anything we have to give up. Both paint the picture of someone being so excited by what they found that nothing they have is too high a price to pay. What this means in practical terms is rearranging our lives around accomplishing God's will. Everything we do is something we'd be willing to trade in if it furthered the work of the kingdom. This can take a number of different forms in our lives. I'm certain I will not manage to cover them all here, but these prominent ones must be mentioned. And before we get into sacrifice, that's absolutely true, but this can be overdone, and I think it kind of has been to a degree in certain teachings or in recent years. The radical kind of, that book that was a very popular one, and things like that, where you think I've got to sacrifice all the time. If I'm not ministering all the time, if I'm not doing some kind of church work every single day, every night, if I don't have somebody in my house, studying the Bible or being hospitable or whatever, then I'm not doing enough. Family life is part of your ministry. Your work life is part of your ministry. Rest is even part of your ministry. All of those things, but and so there's some people that go too hard, and then some people where it really is a need to step up, a need to grow and improve, and all those things. And so it's going to be case by case, but sometimes more sacrifice, sometimes not being as protective of every night of the week and all of your comforts and things like that is what it's going to take to get the kind of things we're just about to talk about. So let's continue on with that. We must be sacrificial with our time. When I first moved out of my parents' house and got my own place, my mom and sister were determined not to let me have the stereotypical bachelor pad. They stocked the kitchen with all kinds of cookware, most of which went unused, put a few pictures on the wall, and gave me a plant for greenery. I did not want a plant. In my mind, I did not need a plant. I said as much. Nevertheless, when they rolled out of the driveway and left me to the house alone, I had a plant. I was told it needed water every 2 weeks, but I wasn't exactly regimented in keeping that schedule. What usually happened is that I would forget to water the plant, a few weeks would pass, it would start to wilt, and once it got bad enough, I'd finally notice the plant had turned into a yellowing, dried-up shell of its former self. So I'd grab a cup of water, give it the nourishment it needed, and watch it spring back to life over the next day or two. Then the cycle would start over. For as long as I had that plant, that was the cycle I followed. Let the plant nearly die before it got my attention, then provide it some last-minute watering to keep it alive. When we're not active in each other's lives with regularity, our building up of each other is no different than my watering routine with the plant. When I've spoken to Christians about how our churches can grow in love for one another, I often receive pushback. We already are loving. This pushback usually involves stories about how the congregation came to a fellow member's aid when they had a medical emergency, or how they all rallied around someone who was grieving a loss. All of those things are beautiful displays of love that should not be dismissed. However, if we don't go beyond that, then we're only watering the plant when it's wilting. And again, not to downplay those things at all. I mean, that is a great show of love, and people who don't have the church don't even know how great it is to have something like that, to have people in your corner like that. And so that is, those special occasions, definitely a good thing, but not the only thing. Continuing, 2 thoughts must be remembered. First, God's design wasn't just for us to be there for each other in the hour of our emergencies. He intended a constant, regular, week in and week out nourishment. We are to keep each other fed and strengthened. We are to pray for each other, encourage each other, and build each other up with counsel from the Word, but we can't do that if we don't know what's going on in each other's lives. Second, though we aim to be there for each other in times of need, the truth is we're always in need. Our service, encouragement, teaching, and correction isn't a series of scheduled events, but a lifestyle. As the Hebrew writer commanded us, we are to be encouraging one another day after day, Hebrews 3:13. Whether you realize it or not, you need your church family regularly bringing Christ's love and truth into your life. And whether you and they realize it or not, your church family needs you to regularly bring Christ's love and truth into their lives as well. Eventually, regularity gets seen as reliability. Most people don't just become part of a congregation and instantly start opening themselves up to those around them. Constant encouragement and relationship building go a long way in showing people they are loved, and people come to rely on the people who love them. Once regularity becomes reliability, we begin fostering the culture of vulnerability. We are to confess our sins to one another and bear one another's burdens, but we don't share our burdens and sins with people unless we know we can rely on them, that we're safe with them. Consistent, Christ-like love applied regularly is what it takes to earn that reliability. From there, we are free to be open with each other, confessing our sins and leaning on each other. Regularity, then, is the key. This is such a challenging, delicate thing, but the time does make a big difference of just regularly being there, being a presence in somebody's life, being an encouragement in their life, caring for them, checking in on them, things like that, leads to the opportunities, leads to the chances to even open ourselves up. Sometimes that's one of the best ways to open up to make it to where somebody else feels comfortable with vulnerability is by sharing your own weaknesses and telling your own stories of shortcomings, or asking them for prayer or whatever the case may be. That goes a long way for them to feel connected to you. But again, that takes the investment, that takes the time. Continuing, in practical terms, this looks like making a determined effort to get to spend time with others. It means being sacrificial with your time. If you don't have time to see or talk with any of your church family outside of Sunday morning, then you don't have the opportunity to obey God's commands to love one another and all the other sub-commands that follow it. You won't be able to make time for your entire congregation, but you can do it for some. Pray asking for people you can love and encourage, and then work to build a rapport with them by becoming a regular in their lives. Practice regular hospitality, grab Sunday lunch with them, pray for and with them, bring Christ-like love into their lives. Not everybody is going to be interested, and that's just fine. Take those who are interested and show love to them. Through this, you can also help disciple them, discussing the Word together, praying together, and developing a kingdom focus together. Apologies for the dryer cycle chime you just heard in the background there. As a church leader, this may very well mean scaling back on the church schedule. If people are constantly expected to be at the building, they aren't going to have time to practice these things. It's because we have a backward, business-like view of the church that many see attendance every time the doors are open as the sign of faithfulness. In the New Testament, the sign of a faithful Christian is the fruit they bear. We have to give people the training to bear fruit, and then we have to give them the time and space to do so. Yes, it's important to be at the assembly each Sunday. That should always be a non-negotiable, but the parts of the church schedule set by man should always be adaptable to the goal of glorifying Christ. Before I give an anecdote about that, some churches, this really is the case where you look at the calendar, and especially through the summer or whatever, the busy times of year, 4 or 5 nights a week, there's just something to do. There's people coming and going, and events and things you're supposed to be a part of, and it can be a little bit much. It makes it to where the church, again, consumer provider, the church is providing all of the opportunities, doesn't give people the time, A, to have family time, the rest and recovery time, and B, to then build on that with ministry time of their own, bearing fruit as we just talked about. So, an example here. At my congregation, we have some folks who rarely make Sunday night and Wednesday night gatherings at the building. Some might consider them unfaithful, wavering members, but they are also regulars at weekly in-home fellowship times, take part in multiple personal studies each week, and are the first to volunteer every time there's a chance to serve. One of them leads multiple ministry efforts. Some might consider this heresy, but I'm just not bothered that they aren't there on Wednesday nights. For one couple, it's one of the few nights a week they can have together. They're regularly bearing the kind of fruit God wants His people to bear. Am I supposed to say they don't care about their fellow members because they aren't there on Wednesday? They're more in tune with their fellow members than just about anybody. Am I supposed to say they aren't interested in growing? They're constantly shifting their schedule around to study with others week in and week out. In short, they're doing what Jesus did. I'm not saying that Christians should start defying church leadership and show up only when they deem necessary because they're busy with other things. I'm saying that church leadership should keep the ultimate goal in mind in creating the schedule for church life. If someone is involved in more service, fellowship, and study than the service, fellowship, and study we're trying to provide at the midweek gathering, then we're doing something right in making disciples instead of consumers. So, to pause on that for a second, this is one you do have to be careful with. There is a little bit of young and naive in that, that a lot of situations, people, that's an exception that's going to be pretty rare. The ones I was talking about, when their schedule slowed down a little bit, work slowed down, and other things, and they kept at it with the personal things and the bearing fruit, but when the opportunity arose, they were in Wednesday night regularly. They still are, and so that's the heart of somebody who wants to be there. And when it's possible, they're there. There's I guess what I'm trying to say is most people should be there during the regular times. Sometimes you can make a special exception, but the idea is to look at the church calendar and say, what's the best way to plug people in the way that we're trying to get done here? Continuing. It borders on the Pharisaical to judge people for their adherence to human traditions rather than the fruit they're bearing. How many every time the doors are open Christians know little about their fellow Christians? How many have perfect attendance yet don't see anybody else outside the building? Christ-like love isn't about checking off the attendance box or doing something nice every now and then. It's about sacrificing our time to build each other up. Regularity is where the growth, love, and service happens. It's going to cost us our time to make it happen. This is one of those again, it's difficult. I had a classmate in preaching school who was a very evangelistic guy, and he ended up dropping out because he had some evangelistic irons in the fire and didn't have time to pursue them because of preaching school. And he looked at it as, what am I supposed to just let these people dangle for 2 years while I go and get my education and not teach them about Christ? And it was a tough balance. And so with these things, we really should be working ourselves to a level outside the church to where we do feel like there's enough going on out there. And again, not to take time off from the congregation or whatever else, but that the work of the church, I guess is what I'm getting at, happens not just on the church calendar. The work of the church is going on day by day in somebody's house somewhere or another. All right, continuing. We must be sacrificial with our money and possessions. While a kingdom-centered view of money is a topic worthy of a book all its own, I do think a few points should be highlighted here. Of greatest importance, Jesus did not care about keeping up with the Joneses. He gave up the riches of heaven to live without a place to lay his head because that's what God's plan required. That attitude is what he expects of his followers. I've often assured myself in crowds I've preached to that when Jesus told the rich young ruler to sell all he had, give to the poor, and come follow, that such a requirement was not one given to everybody. Instead, he was just poking at the greatest idol in the ruler's heart. While that may be true, Luke 12:29-34 should not be ignored. There, Jesus adds on to the phrases most often quoted from Matthew 6:20 and 33, lay up your treasures in heaven and seek first the kingdom, with an interesting twist. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell what you have and give alms. Provide yourselves money bags which do not grow old, a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches nor moth destroys. Luke 12:32-33. Seeking first the kingdom and laying up our treasures in heaven isn't just about having the right attitude about the value of possessions and God's ability to provide. It also means doing something about it, acting in such a way that it's clear we value the kingdom more than the temporal. It means cutting back on what we have when we have the chance to help others. Again, my instinct is to start downplaying this command and take it as less than literal. But in their attempts to observe all he commanded, his disciples did exactly what Jesus described here. In Acts 2-5, we see them repeatedly selling what they had and bringing it to the apostles to distribute to those in need. In 2 Corinthians 8, Paul commends the Macedonian Christians for having the same attitude. They were in deep poverty, yet they found a way to contribute to the needs of the saints. And, of course, we can point to Matthew 25, where Jesus insisted that those he would know in the judgment are those who are clothing, feeding, visiting, and taking in those in need. A Jesus-centric view of our possessions leads to a church culture that is radically different than worldly culture. Where money, possessions, and experiences are some of the world's great idols, we as the church are able to see those things as tools in God's hands for blessing others. Yes, there can be abuses of this. In 2 Thessalonians 3:7-12, Paul addresses the importance of working and not being a burden on others. Having a sacrificial, kingdom view of money doesn't mean providing people the opportunity to leech off others. On the other hand, it doesn't mean taking a vow of poverty and never spending a dime. Instead, it's about our attitude toward what we have. It means having a constant eye toward blessing and caring for others out of what we've been given that goes beyond just our weekly budgeted contribution, even if we have to cut back and downsize from time to time in order to do so. So with this one, this is another one that really maybe got overblown a little bit 10, 15 years ago. The emerging church movement and, again, the radical thing, David Platt, Francis Chan, some of those guys, leading a lot of people to think, man, I shouldn't have anything. I can't ever buy a new car, house that has to stay below a certain size, things like that. That's not necessarily accurate. I mean, we see wealthy people in the scriptures who did come to the faith. We see Jesus' ministry supported by various women, and the missionaries many times were sent by donors and things like that. And so having money, having this idea that you can't have anything, or there's a threshold that God establishes for you can only do this much. On the other hand, yes, there is extravagance. There's all the warnings in 1 Timothy 6, but there's warnings to the rich and to the poor and about how to view money and things like that. But the main thing is, as we look at not just what we put in the plate on Sunday, but you look at the resources you have, whether, as we're about to talk about with hospitality, having people over costs money, being involved in different things, supporting a missionary, whatever it may be, thinking Christ-likely, this is another way to serve the church and be constant in thinking about the church and your part in it. So everyone's going to be at a different place on that one and have a pull in a different direction, so it's just general principles to go off of. All right, this next one I think is kind of the linchpin, maybe at the heart of the design of getting this stuff right. Continuing on, we must be sacrificial with our homes. We live in an era where the house is totally closed off to the outside world. It is our escape, our sanctuary. All you have to do is contrast the design of houses built today and houses built 50 years ago. Not only do we not have front porches anymore, but the design has gone in the opposite direction. We live in fortresses where the living areas are being built downstairs or to the back of the house, walling us off from the world outside our front door. We then retreat inside these fortresses and connect with the outside world through social media, a terribly fake substitute for real-life interaction. To love one another as Christ loved and to take the church outside of the building, we're going to have to tear down those walls. Metaphorically, of course. It's not just that be hospitable to one another is a command, 1 Peter 4:9, but it's also one of the ways we're expected to be devoted to one another in honor, Romans 12:10-13. It's so important to God that He doesn't want men to rise to leadership positions in the church if this practice isn't part of their lives. 1 Timothy 3:2, Titus 1:8. Why is it so important? Before we go on there, those commands are there. It is a serious thing that leadership be involved in hospitality. And I really think, as we've talked about in other chapters, leadership sets the tone. They set the culture for the church. And one of the ways they do that, one of the ways you can look and tell, is a church a close-knit family? Are they in each other's homes? Is there any church life to be seen outside of the building? Well, what do the leaders do? If they don't do it, if they don't have people in their homes, if they have risen to leadership without a practice of visiting and having people over, feeding them, and fellowshipping with them in that way, bringing members of the church together. If they're not doing that, it's probably not happening because, again, leadership sets the culture. And so I think it's perfectly logical why God made that a requirement in the elder qualifications. Continuing on, when it comes to helping people grow in Christ, the kitchen table can be just as effective as the pulpit, possibly even more. That's one of my favorite sentences, just patting myself on the back here. Favorite sentences in the book that, man, we think and I know we've talked about sermons in this read through already in the previous chapters and how one size fits all 30-minute lessons once a week isn't going to get it done, but just the contrast between a guy up there talking, sitting face to face across the table, sharing your heart with somebody else. It's a no-brainer. All right, continuing. It's in the informal setting of the home that we can share questions, help people learn at their own level and pace, and pray specific prayers together. It's where Jesus did much of his teaching. It's where discipleship has a chance to take off. And it's a fantastic tool for evangelism. It gives us the opportunity to introduce people to the church as Jesus' people, rather than as an organization for them to either like or dislike. One of my very favorite things about growing up in my parents' house was their dedication to hospitality. We had fairly regular get-togethers where literally dozens of Christians were in our home for a meal. At other times, we would have another Christian family or two over for dinner and sit around the table, late into the night, discussing the Bible, the church, the culture, and all kinds of other topics. I remember young mothers giving my mom a call and asking if they could come over and pick her brain about parenting, education, or anything else they needed help with. It was, and still is, a fairly regular occurrence for Christian friends to come in from out of town and call to ask if they could stay, leading to more time of fellowship and deep conversation. Just posting a picture of their house on social media when I go back for a visit has led to all kinds of Christian friends commenting to reminisce about times of fellowship there. I know it's been a blessing to the dozens, if not hundreds, who have come through. I know it's been a blessing to my parents, and it's been a blessing to me. I learned early and often the importance of Christian fellowship. I grew from the conversations in which I got to listen and later participate. It's that sense of family and the realization that some of the deepest growth comes from long, Bible-focused conversations that showed me church could be more. It's the disparity between the feeling of coming home from a Sunday morning with a little sense of community versus a Sunday night or a night of table fellowship that shows why it's so important to spend that extra time together. That's some of my fondest memories. That's, as I said, the legacy that they have. Probably hundreds of people know them for having them in their home, and at times complete strangers coming over for a meal and things like that. And the great thing is that's a legacy my mom got from her grandmother, and there are still people. That my great-grandmother passed away 20 years ago. There's still people in the area who talk about going over to their house, knowing her and her husband. It's such a great way to bless people. And man, if we can't do it with the people we sit with in the pews every Sunday, it's going to be a hard habit to start. And so it's and again, I think there is a bit of a giftedness to this. I don't think that everyone's going to be as good at this as others. Again, it is a requirement for elders, and so it should be something they're practicing. But anybody can do it on some level. Even as a single young minister, I'd have people over and buy some pizza or whatever else. Just take the opportunities, create the opportunities, because, man, that's where the real connection happens. However, a few concerns arise whenever this topic is discussed. My house is never clean enough to have people over, some have said. It doesn't matter if your house is sparkling clean if you're having one of those weeks where the laundry and dishes just won't ever end. Letting people in our imperfect houses is actually a great metaphor for how church life should work. We're letting each other see that our lives aren't Instagram perfect. By doing this, we're showing that our fellowship isn't defined by preserving a perfect facade. We're saying instead that loving each other and building each other up are more important than making everyone think our lives are flawless. If you want to host others for meals, cost can also become an issue. Rest assured, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't matter if you can provide prime rib or peanut butter and jellies. What matters is that the family has a chance to be with each other and build the kind of relationships where the one another's can be fulfilled. But even feeding people inexpensive meals with any regularity can be a strain if the budget is tight. So get creative with it. Cut out a trip to the restaurant once a month with the faith that God will bless what we give up for Him and His work. Plenty of folks don't even have that kind of expense to cut, though. An option in that case, plan a shared meal where each person or family brings their own. Once again, the message is being sent that what matters is being together and not showing off. Another option might be to take $5 or so off your weekly contribution and put it toward having some brothers and sisters over for a meal and a time of devotional and prayer once a month. This was written in 2019. Now you'd have to take $10 off a week to maybe feed somebody. Some church leaders probably aren't terribly happy with that suggestion, but it gets at the heart of thinking the church as a family rather than an organization. Doing such isn't taking away from the work of the church, it's doing the work of the church as an active participant. If you want to feel truly blessed and truly bless others, make time for hospitality and table fellowship. To grow and to help others grow, work on developing relationships that go beyond the building. Use the resources God has given you to model Jesus, teach Jesus, and show others how to do the work of Jesus. I think those are fair objections. I do think we have to get past the perfect house thing. It's even better for people to see, hey, we're normal. That because if every time you have somebody over there, your house is perfect, you're going to set the example that this can only be done if your house is perfect. So, yeah, and again, the fanciness of the meal doesn't really matter. Very rarely do people remember. They might remember a peanut butter and jelly. I use that example, but just in general, it's we care about each other enough to make the time together happen. And so, again, I think everywhere I go and speak on this, when I think about it myself, that is, if you want to make this happen, you want to get closer with your church family, have somebody over. Start getting into that practice. All right. We must be sacrificial with our comfort. First, we have to give up our carefully cultivated image. Discipleship, growth, and the one and others don't happen without us opening ourselves up and letting others truly know us. This isn't a flaw in the design, it's a foundational piece of God's plan. Such openness keeps us humble, reliant on His grace, and leaning on each other. It's been said that one of the great flaws of the social media era is that we compare our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reel. We put the best of ourselves out on social media, while in real life the struggles are still all too real. What we need is to be loved for who we really are and not for our highlight reel. God doesn't just love the cleaned up version of ourselves we present to the world. His love wouldn't be very valuable if that's all it covered. Instead, He knows everything about us and still loves us just the same. That's what we are to offer one another. As long as we only connect in passing, we can preserve the safe, carefully cultivated image we want others to see. We can answer, "How are you?" with "good" each Sunday morning, no matter how deep our struggles may be that week. If we're going to practice confessing our sins to one another, bearing one another's burdens, and letting others bear our burdens, by necessity, we'll have to commit to going beyond that to let ourselves be truly known. When you open your life up and invite others in, they're going to see the moments of marital conflict, the struggles with sin, the days where we're short on patience. That picture of the lovely, well-put-together home we've given everyone is going to be shattered from time to time. This is the trade we've been called to make if we want the treasure of the kingdom. Before I go on, that's one, I had one child, the second was on the way when I wrote the book, but that's one that as time goes on, you get awful embarrassed, sometimes about people coming in your house and seeing your kids' behavior, and you don't want to have to give the impression that, wow, things aren't perfect around here, and my kids are, you want people to think your kids are just perfectly behaved at all times. It's just not realistic, and being okay with that, not being self-conscious about seeing the issues, saying, hey, I'm going to have to step out of the room for a minute to go handle a problem, and a disciplinary problem, whatever the case may be. Yeah, that's life. That's the kinds of things that, especially with other parents, you can say, man, we've all been there. I mean, things like that. If we don't do that again, it's we're all perfect, and I'm afraid to be the one who's imperfect, so I keep it to myself. It's better to be around each other and be open in those ways. As a deeply introverted person, this is a great struggle. I'm perfectly fine just sitting back and keeping to myself. On top of that, as a preacher, the struggle is even greater. As a minister, it can feel dangerous to open up about our flaws. Unfortunately, it's not unheard of for ministers to lose their jobs after admitting to sins. At the very least, it will change the way people think of us. So there are certainly considerations to the way we handle these things. I don't think it would be wise to make each Christian get up in front of a room full of people and tell everyone their deepest, darkest struggles. However, if we're dedicated to growing closer to one another, we won't be able to hold on to our perfect facades for long. Thus, the decision has to be made. Sacrifice the image I've cultivated for the sake of promoting Christ, or hang on to my comfort. Jesus taught us that if we're striving for the praise of men, we'd better be happy with it because that's the only reward we're getting. In order to model Christ for others, we have to empty ourselves, as with all of these things. The message is that though it hurts, it's eternally worth it. Second, we have to learn to give consideration. It's our default state to see the world through our own eyes. It takes practice to see others' point of view. The disciple should be taught both by word and by example just how important it is to consider how what we say and do affects those around us. Each Christian must grow into the habit of considering what will give grace to those who hear, Ephesians 4:29, around our Christian family, and seasoning our speech with the salt of grace, Colossians 4:6, among the lost. Will I be a stumbling block? What does the weaker brother need from me? Does this edify or tear down? What kind of example am I setting? The Christ-following Christian knows he is not living for himself. There's some people who might not be capable of this level of consideration, and that's okay. Those who are, those who have the maturity, those who the social skills, whatever it is, this is a really important thing, that we are attuned to the people around us, that we're asking them questions, we're checking on them, we're listening to them, and not just talking about ourselves or inserting or just keeping at arm's length, or all the different things that we might want to do, or not even want, but be prone to do, just naturally. It's important to walk into the room on Sunday, to be there when somebody comes in your house with the thought of, how can I bless them? How can I hear them out and encourage them, or whatever the case may be. One practical application of this comes in the form of consideration on social media. Every day I scroll by posts from Christians that mock their political opponents as stupid or evil. Even worse, many of those posts tell the poster's opponents to unfriend them. The old, well, if you don't like this, you can remove me as a friend, that kind of thing. How is this behavior Christ-like? It may be our preference to broadcast our opinions. It may be our tendency to think less of those who disagree. But following Jesus means thinking beyond our petty preferences and opinions to more eternal concerns. What is good for the souls of those around me? Will this hurt my relationship with a brother or sister? Will this drive the lost away from Christ? As Paul taught in the discussions regarding the eating of meat sacrificed to idols, just because we have the right to do something doesn't mean we should. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. 1 Corinthians 10:23 and 24. This attitude that focuses on what is truly important above our own preferences is critical to the unity of the church. The disciple needs to be taught such consideration and have it modeled by those who lead them. On this one, there's still truth in that if it is an opinion, a preference, whatever else, yeah, it could be divisive. But there's just so many things where we've been told, well, it's divisive to say such and such, things that are just plain biblical truths of, it might be divisive. It might push somebody away to say, I am against, or I'm for whatever law keeps men out of girls' locker rooms and things like that. It's not being divisive to say a truth that somebody divides over. We need to speak truth and let the chips fall where they may. Seasoned with salt, with love, all of those things, yes, but still hold truth. And with the opinions, preferences, things like that, be a little bit more open to discussion in our stances. But some things just aren't open for discussion, and if somebody has a problem with that, let it be their problem. Third, we have to learn to listen. Our natural inclination might be to express our opinion, share a story we have, or turn the conversation back to our preferences and understandings. Bearing one another's burdens, encouraging each other day after day, and turning each other from sin requires dedication to this skill that is hard to come by these days. Loving others means deferring to others in conversation and showing them we care about them by hearing them out. Fourth, and this is a tough one, the Christ follower must learn to be loving in confrontation. In order to stir one another up to love and good works, Hebrews 10:24, sometimes we're going to have to show each other a better way. On the other side of that coin, we must learn to accept correction. It's not easy to be told we're in the wrong or need to change in some way, but it's an essential part of our growth and close relationships. We all have blind spots and need others to help us see them. The point of these two thoughts is not to create a culture of criticism and tearing each other down. The key to this loving, peaceful correction is a shared agreement that the goal is to help each other be like Christ. This primes us for growth in ways that just aren't possible when our goal is to defend ourselves and preserve a flawless image of ourselves. The only cost is our comfort. this is a really important point of it is really uncomfortable to confront, to correct, to whatever else, especially for the preacher, for the elders. That's the job. Don't take it if you can't do that. And man, again, I don't like it. It's not fun, but it is the job. And it's one of those, you get better at it over time. Your touch, your feel for the situation of not coming in too heavy-handed, but also not coming in too soft and letting off the hook. But when you think about the end of 2 Timothy 3 and what Scripture was given for, and the start of 2 Timothy 4, just a couple verses apart, where he was told to preach the word, and those words that reprove, rebuke, exhort, they're essentially gone from modern religion. The idea of pulling somebody aside and saying, that we might rebuke. We might, if somebody is in unrepentant sin, we might draw the line there. So rebuking still gets done on some level, maybe. Exhort is, all right, you're going, keep doing, step it up a little bit, but yeah, keep moving in the same direction. Encourage, kind of push, excel still more, things like that. Reprove is the gentle correction of, hey, that wasn't the best decision you could have made there, or need you to not do that again, things like that. How often does that happen? How often do we even have the culture of somebody being taken aside and receiving it well and not fleeing to the other church, whatever the case may be? But I don't know, where the reprove, rebuke, exhort thing, that is sorely missing in Christianity right now. And that's, if you can't do that together, you're not going to grow. You're not going to grow closer to each other because we're all walking on eggshells around each other. I can't tell you, hey, that was a bad move. Like, you're not supposed to do that. Or, hey, scripturally, I think you're in the wrong, and here's the case as to why I think why I think that. If we can't do that, yeah, don't expect closeness. And so this is getting out of our comfort zone, is being the guy to say, hey, can we have a chat for a second? Or the older woman to the younger woman to say, I heard you talking about your husband that way, and I know it can be frustrating, but, Titus 2, older women teach the younger to love their husbands, things like that. Yeah, this is the what we're called to do, especially more mature Christians, those in leadership, whatever the case may be for either of those situations. And getting out of that comfort zone and a relationship in which somebody has been confronted by the other, and they had the discussion, they talked it out, the person maybe conceded the point, or they came to an agreement or a place they could both live with, and then they go on. That's a stronger relationship than it was the day before. If most of our relationships have not survived one of those, we're not sure it can survive one of those, we have a problem. And so again, a very underrated point in growing closer to each other. Finishing up, the greatest trade you'll ever make. The ultimate end of all these things is to be a community of people who are living out Christ's example. There are some thoughts here that might be uncomfortable. Quite frankly, some of them make me uncomfortable. If it's a biblically driven discomfort, though, that's a good thing. Without discomfort, we would never be able to break out of the rut of consumeristic Christianity. Everything about Jesus' life was counter to our instinct to put self first. Following him means going against the grain and doing things that don't make a whole lot of sense to our human minds. The key idea that links all of these together and that the New Testament establishes consistently is this: whatever we trade for the kingdom will be more than worth it, both here and throughout eternity. As Jesus reassured Peter when Peter reminded the Lord of the disciple sacrifices, assuredly I say to you that there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my sake and the gospel's, who shall not receive 100-fold now in this time, houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and lands with persecutions, and in the age to come eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. If you think about the beauty of not just living in God's presence, but being surrounded by our brothers and sisters, as we have all been cleansed of all selfishness and love each other for all eternity, it's a powerful thought. As you study the kingdom, though, it becomes clear that God intended those benefits to begin now. No, it won't be as perfect as it will be one day, but we can begin to have a taste of it here, often described as the already but not yet dichotomy of the kingdom. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but it's important we realize God has provided us a chance to get a head start on it in this life. That can only happen when we deny ourselves and teach others to do the same. Discussion questions. How do you think the sacrifices required of Christians today compare with the sacrifices made by Christians in the New Testament church? Which of the sacrifices discussed in this chapter is the biggest challenge for you? What is a practical way you can show sacrificial love to someone in your life? To recap, it's sacrificial love, sacrificing of our time, sacrificing of our money and goods, sacrificing of our homes, and sacrificing of our comfort. A lot there. Covered many things. Again, as I said, the hospitality point I think is right at the very top of getting closer with our church family, and the most important practice that we could undertake. And then the other one is the being confrontational. Man, we're so fragile in this day and age of the kind of snowflake safe spaces, all those memes and jokes about stuff like that. But it really is. I'm afraid to say something to somebody. What are they gonna do? Are they gonna take their ball and go home? Or are they gonna take it poorly? Am I gonna communicate it poorly? Is that gonna be the end of the relationship? I wish there was a way to broadcast and like put a little flag over your head to say, I am correctable. I am open to suggestions of how to do things better. I'm willing to listen. And then we could all walk around with those so we know, hey, and this, as I said, it's not a constant nitpicking, but a chance for if somebody sees me, a way I could grow a little bit. You think that's why athletes have coaches, why they have trainers, is somebody to say, hey, your golf swing's a little bit off. Hey, the pitcher, you're kind of showing which pitch you're going to throw. Like, you've got this tendency you don't know that you have. We all have blind spots, but it takes the comfort, getting out of the comfort zone, to hear those things, to say those things. It's a real challenge, but if you can thread that needle and do these kinds of things well, that's where you really grow close with people. And it's been a blessing where I've been able to get there. There's certainly more work to do on those ends for me, and I'm sure for all of us, but hopefully some practical stuff you can take away from this one. As always, be sure you're subscribed at jackwilkie.com, and I don't think I have anything else to tell you guys about. All the books are up at focuspress.org. You can support me if you're enjoying this at jackwilkie.com as well. Every little bit helps, and I'm very appreciative. You get 4 free ebooks the minute you do that, and you are saved. My next book on Christian assurance is starting to come together. I'm going to start putting out chapters once they're proofed on the site as well. So, as always, just stay plugged in there, and you'll be caught up with the latest. I'll talk to you guys next time.